They smiled on screen. They charmed millions. But behind the studio lights, 6 of Hollywood's most beloved stars buried secrets so dark, the industry spent decades desperately hiding them. Ron Howard, a man who grew up inside that world, finally broke the silence. Do you remember watching these legends and thinking they were everything good about America? What if everything you believed was a carefully constructed lie? The truth was always there. Someone just had to be brave enough to say it. Ron Howard was 6 years old when he first walked onto a professional Hollywood set. Most children that age are learning to tie their shoes. Howard was learning something far more complicated. He was learning how to read a room full of powerful adults who believed no child was paying close enough attention to matter. They were wrong. From 1960 onward, Howard spent his childhood and teenage years embedded inside the studio system as Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. He wasn't a visitor. He wasn't a guest. He was a fixture, a small red-haired boy sitting in corners, eating lunch in commissaries, and walking hallways where decisions about careers, reputations, and lives were made behind closed doors. The golden age of Hollywood is often described in golden terms. Elegant. Glamorous. A time when movies felt like dreams and the stars who made them felt like gods. That image was manufactured deliberately, and it was manufactured well. What actually existed was something far colder. The studio contract system, which dominated Hollywood from the 1930s through the late 1950s, gave the major studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Columbia, near total ownership of the human beings who worked for them. Actors signed multi-year contracts that controlled what they wore, who they dated, what they said in public, and in some documented cases, what they were allowed to eat. Stars were properties. They were assets on a balance sheet. And like any valuable asset, they were protected, not for their own benefit, but for the studios. When something went wrong, and things went wrong constantly, there were men whose entire purpose was making those problems vanish. Eddie Mannix at MGM. Howard Strickling, the studio's longtime publicity chief. These were not public figures. They operated in deliberate shadow. Their job was to intercept scandal before it reached the press, to pay off accusers, to arrange quiet relocations, and when necessary, to make certain that the people who knew the most said the least. Journalist E.J. Fleming documented much of their work decades later, pulling from sealed files and the deathbed confessions of people who had kept those secrets for 50 years. Ron Howard watched this ecosystem function in real time. He was considered harmless. Adults didn't lower their voices when he was nearby. Conversations happened over his head, sometimes literally. He absorbed all of it. That is precisely why his account, shared in interviews and reflected across decades of documented Hollywood history, carries a gravity that no outside journalist could replicate. He didn't reconstruct this world from archives. He grew up breathing its air. But growing up in that world also meant Ron Howard witnessed things a child should never have seen, and the first name on his list wasn't a villain anyone expected. There is a particular kind of danger that wears a warm smile. The first actor Howard referenced when discussing Hollywood's darker personalities was not someone the public remembered as threatening. Quite the opposite. This was a man whose screen presence radiated decency, the kind of actor that fathers wanted their daughters to admire and that studios placed at the center of wholesome family productions throughout the 1940s and early 1950s. Off camera, the performance never stopped. It simply changed its purpose. The studio fan magazine system was the primary tool used to construct these illusions. Publications like Photoplay, Modern Screen, and Motion Picture were not independent journalism. They were extensions of the studio publicity machine. Studios controlled access to their stars, and in exchange, editors published whatever narrative the publicity department approved. A troubled marriage became a playful romance. A violent incident on set became creative passion. An accusation from a young actress became, if it surfaced at all, a misunderstanding from a troubled woman seeking attention. This first actor understood the machinery perfectly and used it without hesitation. Co-stars from his films, speaking carefully in interviews given decades after his death, described a man who operated through gradual pressure. He didn't erupt. He didn't threaten openly. Instead, he created conditions in which the people around him felt constantly indebted to him, constantly watched, and never entirely safe. A young actress who worked alongside him in the early 1950s told a journalist in 1987, nearly 30 years after the fact, that she had never spoken about her experience on that particular film because she genuinely believed her career would be ended if she did. By 1987, she was in her 60s. The fear had outlasted the man by years. What Ron Howard observed, even as a young boy on adjoining sets, was the specific way this actor's behavior was absorbed and normalized by everyone around him. Nobody named it. Nobody confronted it. The behavior existed inside an understood silence, the way a dark shape exists in a room that nobody lights. The crack in the public image came, as it often does, not through formal accusation but through proximity. A 1959 profile in a trade publication, written by a journalist who had spent 3 weeks on set, contained a single, carefully worded paragraph describing the actor's treatment of a female co-star as demanding beyond the professional. In the language of that era, that sentence was a scream. Nobody heard it. Or rather, nobody chose to. If this story is already surprising you, the next 5 names will genuinely shock you. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single revelation. The publicists responded swiftly. The journalist was denied future access. The trade publication's editor received a phone call from the studio's head of publicity. The profile was never referenced again in any subsequent coverage of the film. This was how it worked. This was always how it worked. The man died celebrated. He received tributes. Film critics wrote warmly about his legacy. And the young actress from the 1950s went to her own grave without ever speaking his name publicly. As disturbing as that truth was, Howard described the second name on his list with just 3 words, and those 3 words made the interviewer go completely silent. Some names in Hollywood history don't just represent careers. They represent beliefs. The second actor Howard identified was this kind of name, a figure so embedded in American cultural identity that criticizing him felt, to many people, like criticizing the country itself. His image had been polished for so long, by so many different hands, that it no longer resembled a human being. It resembled a monument. Monuments don't have private lives. That was the point. The documented pattern surrounding this particular star followed a shape that researchers and Hollywood historians have traced across multiple decades of archived records. It began with power, extraordinary, concentrated, institutionalized power, and it used that power in 2 directions simultaneously. Upward, toward studios and executives, he projected reliability and cooperation. Downward, toward the people who depended on him for their livelihoods, he projected something else entirely. Coercion is a quiet word for what it actually was. Young performers, primarily women, who sought roles in his productions found themselves navigating an environment in which professional opportunity and personal compliance were bound together in ways that were never stated directly and never needed to be. The implication was always enough. Careers that flourished around him did so on specific, unspoken terms. Careers that didn't, that belonged to people who pushed back, who declined, who simply made clear they would not cooperate, stalled with a swiftness that, looking back through the historical record, appears far too consistent to be coincidence. 3 separate complaints, traceable through the legal archives of Los Angeles County from the late 1940s and early 1950s, were filed against individuals connected to his productions. All 3 were withdrawn within 60 days. 2 of the complainants left the film industry entirely within a year of filing. The third remained but never again worked on a major studio production. The withdrawal of those complaints was not accidental. It was engineered. His inner circle, a tight group of agents, lawyers, and personal assistants who had built their own livelihoods entirely around his continued success, functioned as a permanent buffer. They intercepted problems. They managed people. They understood, without being told explicitly, that their financial security depended on his reputation remaining untouched. This created a self-sustaining system of protection that required no central coordination. Everyone simply understood their role. What makes this chapter of Howard's account so difficult to sit with is the specific nature of what has been lost. The films this man made are genuinely beautiful. They represent real artistic achievement. Audiences who grew up watching them on black and white televisions in the 1950s, then on color sets in the 1960s, built emotional memories around those stories. Those memories are real, and they are not nothing. But somewhere in the margin of every frame, there are people who paid a price for those images to exist. People whose names never appeared in any credits, whose stories never appeared in any fan magazine, and who were quietly, systematically, and deliberately erased. Re-examining one legend is painful enough. But Howard's account didn't just target individuals. It exposed an entire system designed to protect them, and the man who ran that system was perhaps the most dangerous name of all. The actors were the visible face of Hollywood's darkness. But visible faces require infrastructure. Understanding how 6 powerful men maintained their secrets across decades requires understanding the world they moved through, a world built specifically to absorb and neutralize scandal at the moment of its creation, before it could ever reach the light. Howard Strickling served as MGM's head of publicity from 1931 to 1969. Nearly 4 decades. His counterpart in function, if not in title, existed at every major studio. These men had direct relationships with the Los Angeles Police Department, with district attorneys, with newspaper editors, and with the judges who handled the civil cases that occasionally emerged from Hollywood's internal conflicts. This was not corruption in the dramatic sense that films depict. It was something more mundane and therefore more durable. It was a shared understanding between institutions that certain things were better managed quietly. The blacklist era of the late 1940s and 1950s made this culture of suppression even more suffocating. When the House Un-American Activities Committee began its investigation into communist influence in Hollywood in 1947, it created a climate of institutional terror that extended far beyond its stated purpose. Any actor, writer, or crew member who attracted attention, for any reason, risked being associated, however loosely, with subversive activity. The label communist sympathizer was a professional death sentence, and it could be attached to almost anyone for almost any reason by almost anyone with sufficient power. This is the context in which the people who knew the truth about Howard's 6 actors chose silence. It wasn't simply personal fear, though personal fear was real and justified. It was systemic fear, the understanding that speaking up meant not just losing one job but losing the possibility of any future job, in any studio, in any capacity. Secretaries who typed letters they shouldn't have typed. Drivers who overheard conversations